Once again, I just want to thank everyone again for your participation in our the New Mexico Christian Children's Home gift drive, as well as the cookies. I also want to give a shout out to Julie Hillard, who apparently found out that she does in fact have an oven and used Bessie's. Okay, so apparently she does not bake, but she chose to bake some cookies for the kiddos, and so for all of those in the different ways that you gave, miracles do happen. So, and I didn't see any burned cookies. There were no hockey pucks or anything. So that's really good. So thank you all for your participation in that. I just pray that you'll continue to think about different ways in which you can give. And we're actually going to talk about the different gifts and what they might mean. And we're going to land in Matthew today. We've spent a lot of time in Luke. It's interesting how Luke is going to cover the birth of Jesus and talk about the shepherds, and then completely really skip out the whole thing about the wise men. Okay, and then Matthew is going to do the exact opposite. Matthew's going to be like, yeah, Jesus was born, and then give an extended look at the wise men. And so that's why we don't have those two together. And so when we put them together, a lot of times that's when we think, oh, we have the shepherds, we have the manger, we have the wise men. Well, there's going to be a big difference in time. And we'll talk a little bit about how we know that based on what Scripture says. So go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 2. But to introduce this, I want to talk for just a little bit about gifts and their meanings. And so I want to open up the floor for just a few minutes, and I want to talk about a gift that you've given or received or that you saw somebody receive, and what was significant about that gift and why it had such meaning to it. So I just want to open that up for a minute and talk about the meaning of gifts. Has anybody given, received, or watched a gift be given and you thought, man, there's really significance to that?
Does it have to be Christmas?
It doesn't have to be Christmas.
About practical, I gave Bessie a can opener for her birthday because she has so much trouble with a hand crank.
Okay.
I gave her one of the ones you have to push down.
You push down. Okay. So she's another one who was a recipient of a can opener. And it can have special meaning. It can be practical. My wife has told me, I don't know if she means it, but she says, I appreciate practical gifts. She got probably one of the weirdest gifts this December. Well, she's gotten several weird ones, but one of them, when she got this year, was a door. Yeah, I got her a door for Christmas, and she said she liked it. I mean, our old door was in bad shape, and so I said, hey, I'm going to get you a door. And I'd love to say there's great significance and meaning to it, but our old door was pretty dilapidated, and oh, Michael, Cheney, you're going to say something terrible about the door, but go ahead. Okay. You gave Julia a leaf blower because you don't put out enough air around the house that she thought, in case you're not around, she can just plug that bad boy in, and she probably calls it Michael. Michael. So I had to do it. I had to do it. So I will not pick on anybody else like I did Michael, but he deserved it. So anybody else, if you want to share something, was there something meaningful about that gift, Michael, that when you gave it to her, she was like, oh, yes, because
she asked for it.
Because she asked for it.
She got it.
And she got it. Okay. That's great. That's wonderful. She asked for it and she got it. Okay, what else? Is anybody else? Yes, Julia.
I want to tell another one on Terry Hall.
Okay.
Because when I had Jacob in the 2-year-olds, Jacob Hall, he came after Christmas so excited that he could hardly wait to tell me what his mother had gotten for Christmas. He could hardly wait to use it. It was an electric knife.
An electric knife.
Yes.
Okay.
Mom decided, and he said his mother loved it. And you know, he became an engineer. So he was just over the hill over this knife.
Yeah.
And that's all he could talk about.
It's the closest thing you can get to a chainsaw in the kitchen. I mean, but it's a cool gift. I mean, it makes noise, it's sharp, it's shiny, it's everything that a guy likes. Like, wow. And you can plug it in, so why not love that gift? So Terry Holloman was thrilled, or Jacob was thrilled that Terry had gotten an electric knife as a gift for Christmas one year. Other gifts and what meaning that are associated with those gifts.
I gave my granddaughter a gun and some shells.
Okay, you gave her a gun and some shells.
In the past, she's mentioned she wanted one and shoot and stuff. And also, one of the meanings is she will have a keepsake that her grandfather gave her when I'm gone.
Yeah. And so it's not only just giving the gift at that moment, but sometimes it's having a keepsake. For those of you who've received a gift that's being passed on, you know, some of the most treasured things in our house are things that really probably have very little value. If you were to try to take them to a pawn shop, they probably would be worth next to nothing. But some of the things that are valuable for us in our house are like quilts. Quilts that have been passed down from Jennifer's grandmother to her mother, and now she has it. You know, that's kind of a big deal. And even Lily and Jennifer were talking a couple days ago about something that she hopes that's going to get passed on to her that had belonged to her great grandmother, Jennifer's Bibby. And so those are important gifts. Brad, what did you say?
Our twins came the day after Christmas.
The twins came.
We went to the hospital on Christmas Day.
On Christmas Day. On Christmas Day, you got to go and spend it in the hospital. And then on the December 26th, you had twins. All right, Karen had twins.
She did all
Yes.
the work.
You did all. She did all the work. Of course she did. So, and that obviously is a special gift. Does anybody else have it? Yes.
Okay, the anniversary gift, I rented Tom Selleck's Ferrari for 24 hours for him.
No way.
Yeah,
Jennifer, take notes. Okay, Barb said that for their anniversary, she rented for a day Tom Selleck's Ferrari that he had on Magnum PI. Jennifer, I would love Tom Selleck's mustache. If you could get that for me, I would love that. If you could kind of work that out. I loved Magnum PI. That was a great show. Okay. Anybody else have a gift? Yes.
Okay, so last year for Christmas I got her dumbbells. And for her birthday I got her workout shoes.
Okay.
I asked for both of them, but I was so nervous about the perception of what people were going to think.
Yeah.
I didn't give them any other. I really needed them. I really wanted them.
Yes.
I gave different workout shoes versus my everyday shoes.
Yes. And so you got dumbbells.
I did, but I didn't give him any other ideas because that's what I wanted. He said, I can't buy you that. Yes, you can.
Yes, you can. That's what I want.
So long, I was like, I'm going to buy something else.
You just yeah. Okay, dumbbells. That's pretty good. I like that. Honey, that's... No, I won't get you that next year. I can see that look on you says if you do that, I'm, get them dropped on my foot. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about gifts and the importance of gifts, and we're actually going to find ourselves in Matthew chapter 2, so you can go ahead and turn there. Now, we're going to talk about 3 different gifts given by how many different wise men?
3.
We don't know, but in fact, we're going to talk about that there's actually, if you go back and look, that there are people who actually named the different wise men, even though we don't know how many there were. But if you go back, some people said, hey, for tradition's sake, we need to name these individuals. And we'll talk about them, not so much about their names, but certainly, their gifts. So we're going to start in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. And again, I want to back up just a little bit more because this is all we get from Matthew about the birth of Jesus. And actually, we'll stop and talk about that. I'm going to start back in Matthew 1:24. When Joseph woke up, this is after having the vision that he needs to stay with Mary because she's going to be with child. That was given to her by the Holy Spirit. When Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord commanded him, and he took Mary home to be his wife. But he had no union with her until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus. That's it. No trip to Bethlehem, no stable, no manger, no innkeeper. Of course, we don't get the innkeeper in Luke, saying that we have no room. So just for fun, okay, let's talk about why would Matthew choose to exclude the story, the birth of Jesus in his gospel. Can you kind of guess why? And this is just pure speculation. But what do we know about Matthew? What do we know about his readers? Why might he omit that really poignant section about the shepherds and the stable?
His audience already knew.
Okay, his audience already knew? Wow. Who did Matthew specifically write to? The Jews. What were the Jews really looking for? A king. Okay, they were looking for a Messiah. They were looking for a king. And I think that's why it's really important that we see that the wise men are included in Matthew's account. I'm not saying that Matthew is being deceptive, but I think Matthew knows his audience. We're going to notice that even as we get the lineage of Jesus, there's going to be a name not mentioned in the lineage. He's not going to skip over it, but he won't even say her name. Does anybody remember her name? That's not included. It's Uriah's wife. Bathsheba is not even mentioned in there. It's kind of a tough story to hear. It's not really a kingly story. And so Matthew's going to he's not going to completely dismiss it, but he's going to kind of just skate over it just a little bit. He's not going to include the story of the birth of Jesus. And while we don't know exactly why, when you're talking to a group of people about Jesus as the king, it's a really tough sell to start off with, oh, by the way, this king of yours was born in Bethlehem and there was no room for him. So he ended up hanging out in his first few days with some farm animals and they placed him in a manger, a feed trough. And so maybe there's a part of Matthew that says, okay, while that is part of the story, I don't want to focus on that. And while Luke probably would have known the story about the wise men, that wasn't important to him. What was important to Matthew is talking about Jesus as king. And don't miss out on this. The wise men is a story about a king. They're traveling, their gifts, and what they're going to say is all about Jesus as king. And that's what Matthew is trying to promote. That's what he's trying to remind his listeners and his readers back then and even now. Jesus is King. We're going to find this theme all throughout Matthew's gospel. And it starts way back here in chapter 2 when he's going to say, hey, don't forget, Jesus is the King. So let's pick up in verse 1 and we're going to read this through. As Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi, we also known as wise men from the east, came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. Pause. Why is he disturbed? Because he's the king. Okay? And kings were very particular about their lineage. And they wanted to pass on their kingship to their heirs. In fact, lots of plots to kill lots of potential heirs took place throughout this time period. It is amazing at what great lengths these queens would do to secure the kingship for their son, going so far as killing other children of the king to ensure that their child, that their son would be king. And so you can imagine that when King Herod hears the story that a king has been born, he's thinking, whoa, 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 I'm the king. And I'm passing on my kingship to my children, to my son. It's not going to go to whoever this is. So he's obviously greatly disturbed by this. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Why would Jerusalem be disturbed by this? Because it was the changing of the guard. They longed for a king who was from Israel. A king who would reunite the people, who would cast out the Romans, who would allow them to have the glory that they once had when they owned the land and lived in it. Now, they were more like renters, so to speak. In fact, they're about to get evicted in about 70 years. And it is going to be a season of great turmoil. But they are longing for a king to bring back Israel to its former glory. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are no by means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of all of my people Israel. Okay, so this right here was well known among the chief priests and the scribes and the religious leaders. Why is this an important note? Why was one of the reasons Jesus was rejected? Well, he was from Bethlehem, but they thought he was from Nazareth. Remember, he was introduced as Jesus of Nazareth. And the response was, nothing good comes out of Nazareth. Right? And so this already had people confused. His parents were traveling. They were from Nazareth. He was born in Bethlehem. He's not going to go back to Nazareth for a while. And we'll find out in just a little bit where he's going to go. But he's not even going to be in the hometown he grew up in for the first several years of his life. We don't know exactly how long, but he had spent some time in Bethlehem. We don't know how long he was there. But ultimately, they're going to end up, well, there's speculation. He could have gone back to Nazareth. All we have is that, we'll read in a little bit where the Magi are going to end up. But the Magi do not show up at the stable where newborn baby Jesus is lying in a manger. they're going to go off into hiding, and we'll talk a little bit about that and why that's important. Okay, so picking back up in verse 7. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child." So he pulls them aside, and what does he ask them? When did you see the star? Why is this important? How old is the baby? What's the time frame? Where likely is that child? And that's going to come into play a little bit later on. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. True? No. Now, we're going to find out what he does, which is just horrific, a little bit later on. After they had heard the king, they went their own way. They went on their way, and the star that they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. So we don't know exactly where he was. He probably didn't stay. You know, we talked about a couple weeks ago that this stable, this inn, probably wasn't a farmhouse that belonged to a stranger. It was likely part of a family member, and there wasn't an innkeeper. It was a distant relative who said, "We don't have any room for you and your wife, but we want you to stay with us. You're going to have to stay out in the barn. That's all we have for you." So we don't know exactly if they would have stayed there or they would have headed back. It says, then they opened up their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Okay, so one more thing I want to point out, and we won't go into great detail, but what's the next topic heading that leads off of chapter 2, verse 13? Okay, the escape to Egypt. Okay, ultimately God's going to come to Joseph and says, "You got to get out of here. Something bad is about to happen." Okay, so let's pause right there. This is one of the reasons why we believe that they didn't go straight back to Nazareth. Is what is King Herod going to do? He's gonna have all the babies. How old? 2 years and younger, and we'll talk about that in just a minute about that time. And what area are they going to be killed? In Bethlehem. So there's reason to believe that for whatever reason, they didn't go straight back to Nazareth, that they remained in Bethlehem. Because that's where God is going to say, "You guys need to get down to Egypt. You need to get out of here." How many of you have been watching The Chosen or have watched The Chosen? There's one. I want to highly encourage you to watch that. It is completely free. At one time you could get it on YouTube. Now you can watch it by an app that you get for free. You can get an app on your phone. Just type in The Chosen, and it will play all of them in there. And there's one particular scene. We also, if you don't have a phone or smartphone, or you don't want to deal with that, we've had one of our members that donated a couple copies of season 1. And if you'd like to watch them via DVD, you can borrow those and watch those as well. But there's one scene that talks about as the apostles are getting to know Jesus just a little bit, and they find out where he was from or where he was born, and when he was born, somebody mentions, "Oh, you mean around the time that all those infants were killed, all those babies were killed?" And he says, "Yes, it was a really difficult time." Now, Bethlehem was not a booming metropolis at the time. It wasn't like a Jerusalem. And so we're not talking about thousands and thousands of babies killed, but there are estimates that range from somewhere as few, I don't want to say as few, but maybe as low as 70 babies were killed. So let's talk for just a minute about this time frame, about 2 years and younger. Why is that? Let's do a little math here. Somebody help me out here. Why 2 years and under?
But they weren't sure exactly when Jesus was born.
Okay, so they're not really sure when they were born. It's probably safe to say that Herod wants to fudge a little on the high side. But remember, okay, so the Magi are going to come from where? The east. Okay, so they learn about this, okay, and they're Magi, but they're possibly involved in astronomy of some kind. Why is that? Why would we believe that? Because they take notice of a star that appears in the sky. And so they're going to make plans. They're going to make preparations. They are going to go out and get the gifts that they're going to bring to the family, to this Messiah, the King that has been born. Okay, so that is going to take a while. They're going to travel all the way there. They're going to end up in Jerusalem. And there they're going to be there for a little while. They're going to come and ask questions. Okay, and as a result, they're going to learn that the baby would have been born where? In Bethlehem. And so they're going to travel there. Okay, and so during that time, they've also made aware to King Herod when the child was born, when they saw the star. And so he's gone back, so he knows about when. So then what's going to happen next? What are they going to do after they worship baby Jesus?
They go a different way.
They're going to go a completely different route. Okay? So again, we have to remember that the speed in which information traveled was how fast? What's the fastest information could travel at that time? A donkey or a horse, some kind of animal. As fast as a messenger can go. There is no reason to believe that there is somebody at the border of Bethlehem who's in a black suit and has a little earpiece in and dark glasses, and as soon as the wise men go by, tell Herod they've left the building. The eagle has flown. There's nothing like that. And so Herod is there. He's waiting for the Magi, and we don't know how long he waits. We don't know how long it is before he realized that he's been duped. And that the Magi who were supposed to come see him have gone a different route. And so when that happens, now it's from that point, after the Magi have prepared, they've come to Jerusalem, they've gone to worship Jesus, they've left, and sometime later is when he realizes this is not good. So he uses the phrase 2 years, and this is where it gets a little confusing. But when you think about this, I'll say this. I just turned 46 in November. I have completed 46 years on this earth. The 46th year has finished, right? Okay. Because when I'm born, I don't celebrate my first birthday. I'm here a year before I celebrate. So at 46, okay, what year am I on now? Thank you for pointing that out. Why did I use me? Why couldn't I use somebody? Why don't we talk about Rusty? Well, that'd be too confusing because I don't triple digits. It's just a little. So anyway, I told you it was coming back. Welcome back, Rusty. So I'm in my 47th year. And so actually, when you go back and you look at this, the way that it's written, it's not necessarily suggesting that it's the 2 years old. It's any child that's on their second year. And so it doesn't necessarily mean when it says any child 2 years or older, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're talking 24 months. For them, it meant anything over 12 months, that they were in their second year. And so that causes a little bit of confusion. But at any rate, we're looking at the highest 24 months and younger. The babies are going to be killed. Now, I just want to stop and think about that for a minute. And Hobbs is much, much, much larger than Bethlehem would have been. But can you imagine the repercussions of that decision? Think about it for just a minute. Think about how drastically Hobbs would be changed And remember, this was not in a time period where people were always coming and going and people commuted. Now we go all across the country in a day, much less talking about what we may do in a lifetime. But for them, a lot of people, where you were born is where you lived. It's where you raised your own family, and it's where you died. That it was not uncommon for you to grow up in the same house your whole life. So I want you to think about this. Can you imagine what happens if Bethlehem, this small town that doesn't get a lot of influx, loses their entire group, 2 years worth of children, just like that? What are the effects of that?
It tells us that in verse 18.
Okay.
A voice was heard around a lamentation, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more.
Now, can you imagine? My wife is a teacher at Broadmoor. Okay, if she had been a teacher in Bethlehem and she was responsible for teaching the kids, she's going to have 2 years in a row where she will have half the number of kids than before. She's going to have 2 years where she has no boys. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being a coach of a football program? And for 2 years, you have no football players? Can you think about not having any basketball players? You have a 2-year stretch where you don't have any guys coming in. Can you imagine being, a worker and, an owner of a business company and part of your workforce are young men and women who come in and work during the summer times? Can you imagine you're going to have a 2-year slot where you have no 16 and 17-year-old boys? Can you imagine what graduation would have looked like? Everybody would have known it. Everybody would have known this is the year you're not going to have any boys graduating from Bethlehem High School. Can you imagine being a girl growing up in that time? Now, granted, it was different. School looked very different from them. But it would almost be like for those girls, they're almost in an all-girls boarding school in some ways. There are no boys around. It's not like it happened and people forgot. Rachel is weeping and she refused to be comforted. The mothers refused because that had completely changed everything for that little town. Not to mention the horrors of hearing that door getting kicked in and somebody grabbing your little boy and you have no idea what's going on. Jesus came in that time period. How many families were completely destroyed when God sent His Son into the world? The hardship that they would face. How many of them would have said, why didn't the angel come to me and warn me to flee to Egypt? That in the midst of this amazing gift, there was heartbreak and turmoil. And so you talk about like how badly people wanted to have a Messiah. They lived within a government system where a leader could come in and take your child and execute them on a whim out of jealousy. We often talk about the things that we don't like and the things that we think the government makes us do. Herod came in and killed 2 years worth of children and just walked out. And so you talk about people wanting a Messiah. It wasn't like, man, we hate to see taxes go to Rome. It was, they are killing us, literally killing us. And this is why Jesus came. Because people were so greedy, that kings were so terrible, that the government was so awful, and people had ignored so much the commands and decrees of God that they would just kill just to protect what they thought was theirs. And this is when all of this took place. So let's go back and spend just a couple minutes. I want to talk a little bit about the Magi. We don't know a whole lot about them. We don't even know how many of them that there are. We just know that they are tracking this star. So this would have taken a while for them to make their way to Jerusalem. They aren't numbered, but church history has expanded on this, and they've actually named them. They gave Melchior is the one who brings gold. Casper brings frankincense. Who would have known that it was Casper? He is the friendly ghost. And then there's Balthasar brings the myrrh. And we're going to talk a little bit about this. In Matthew's account, it's going to say that they opened their what? Their treasures. And so I don't think we should believe that the gift that they were given was this little nugget of gold or a little piece of a little vial of frankincense or this little bit of myrrh. That because they saw this as a gift to a king, that they probably would have brought a larger quantity than what we probably would have imagined. So let's talk about this for just a minute. These were important as these gifts were being read in the first century to the readers, or as they heard this, they immediately would have said, these are the kind of gifts that are often given to a king, at least the first two. Okay, and we'll talk about those in just a minute. But each one of them represented something. Especially gold. Can anybody guess what gold would have represented? Purity, wealth, royalty. This was a gift that was often signified kingship. That the royalty are the ones who had access to the gold. And so back then, especially when you talk about gold being given, gold was given to a king. What about frankincense? What does frankincense represent? When was frankincense used? Does anybody know? It was used in sacrifices. It was used in the temple. When you thought of frankincense, when you got that smell in your nostrils, you immediately imagined the temple. It was the place where worship was done by the priest. And so the frankincense represented a priesthood. Now I'm going to hold off on the myrrh for just a second because it is a completely odd and awkward gift to give. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Gold was valuable, it was beautiful, and it was long-lasting. And so when that gift was given, people would have immediately understood this is the kind of gift. This baby was to be honored as royalty. That this was signifying something important. Okay, frankincense is a gift that would acknowledge the priesthood of Jesus. It was used in temple routines, and it was burned ceremonially by the priest. And frankincense was actually very difficult to obtain. It was brought in from the east, and it was very expensive. And so it would have been recognized by people as being just a really an overwhelming gift. And I want to skip again myrrh. We'll go back to that. These wise men would have been in a special class of individuals. They were priests, usually from Persia, and they go way, way back. In fact, there's a story in the Old Testament that refers to them. Does anybody remember the guy in the lion's den? Daniel in the lion's den. This would go all the way back at least to Daniel. In fact, some suggest that these astronomers, these wise men, they knew about the coming of the Messiah and the fact that he was born in Bethlehem and that there would be this star. They think that may trace all the way back to Daniel sharing those stories of a coming Messiah someday. And that those would have been remembered and passed on over and over again. Gold, going back to gold, it was used in jewelry, ornaments, currency, and oddly enough, this is important to note, in idols. It was something that was worshipped. And that's why this would have been very important. So, let's just talk about this for a minute. Does anybody know why myrrh was important at that time? What was myrrh used for?
Incense.
Frankincense would have been used for the incense, especially in priestly duties. But there's a specific use that myrrh had during that time period.
It was a perfume.
Yeah. It was a perfume. It was used specifically in what? Embalming. What do you embalm?
Dead body.
Okay, so I just want to talk about this for just a second. Okay. Jennifer and I, we've had 3 children, and we have been blessed to be a part of church families that have always showered us figuratively and literally with gifts. And so you go through the process of registering for things that you would like for your child. And that's different through the different ones. The first one we had, we didn't have anything of anything. And we were also, we were very cautious of that. And, we wanted like extra bottles, right? Alexis, you'd get extra bottles because you had to make sure that they were like sanitized and sterile. We even had a bottle cleaner. Like you'd put it in there and like blast it with heat and it would sterilize it so you could use it again. By the third one, we're like, just get the old bottles out of the attic, we can wipe them off, and they'll be good, right? But you register for these gifts. No one in the history of ever said, you want to know what I want for my baby? I want an embalming gift. That's what I want. That's like having a baby in our culture and saying, what do you want? You know what I would really like? I would like a casket. I want a casket because someday my baby's going to die, and I want a place for my baby to stay when it dies.
They knew what Herod had said.
They knew what Herod had said. Maybe they were expecting that might come sooner than later, and if they thought that, they were exactly right because his death happened as a relatively young man. But I want you to think about this. Like this wise man is heading over. Now, well, I'll talk about that in just a minute. But for the people of Judah, for the people especially over in Israel at that time, the purpose of myrrh was for embalming. And the wise man traveling miles and miles and miles is taking a gift that he's going to hand over for them. And it's like, here, I'm giving you a gift. This is for embalming. Can you imagine choosing that gift? Can you imagine that he couldn't have been married? There's no way. There is no way a wise man is going to roll out of town to go see a king and his wife says, hey, honey, you're taking him a gift? Yeah, what do you take him? I'm going to take some embalming fluid for the baby. He wouldn't have been that wise. Or walking at that point. You are not leaving. You are not going to do that. Can you imagine? Think about this. Can you imagine? You're being overwhelmed with this. These people coming. We don't know how many of them there are, but they're bringing these treasures. Can you imagine the first treasure being opened up and say, gold, oh, this is great. Which, by the way, do you think gold is going to be really important? Absolutely. What's about to happen? Joseph and his family, they're about to be on the lam. They're about to flee. This is going to help get them to protect their baby. This gold would have been incredibly valuable in their escape to go down to Egypt, to have enough funds. They didn't have a lot of money. We know this. We know this because what's not mentioned in Luke but mentioned in Matthew, when they go to give the gift, sacrifice for dedication, you're supposed to give a dove and what else? A lamb. But God made a stipulation that if you can't afford the lamb, you can give 2 doves. And that's the sacrifice that they made. They didn't have a lot of money. And so just the fact of receiving this gift, they're about to find out they got to get out of here. And that's going to be helpful for them. They're going to have the frankincense that would have been a gift that reminded them of the priestliness. There would have been this wonderful aroma. They open up that gift. Oh, frankincense. This is so valuable. Can you imagine a young mother holding her little baby? Maybe Jesus is now walking around. Okay? Not on water. He's just walking around. Maybe he's cooing, he's talking, and they open it up and like, it's wow. Thanks. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with this. What do you say? What do you say? I mean, I think that's why it's so important that when the gospel writers say, and Mary treasured this all in her heart. Like she understood that this was going to be a cost for Jesus coming into the world. And it surely would. Here's what's really interesting. While over in Israel, myrrh was used mainly for embalming, over in the Far East, they used it as a potion for healing, an ointment. And so it had this double meaning. Yes, there would be sadness and there would be death for Jesus, but it was going to be healing for the rest of the world. I just want to close out with this in our last minute of class. I just want you to think about this. All of you have an opportunity to worship. And all of you have an opportunity to bring your gift. And for some of you, your gift may be gold, or maybe it's frankincense, or maybe it's myrrh. Maybe your gift is God has talented you with the ability to work in such a way that you are compensated for your work, and you can use that to help in missions. You can help in helping support the church here and in the children's home. Maybe that's your gift. Give your gift to the Lord and do it joyfully. If your gift is standing in front of an oven, or it's writing a card, or it's making a phone call, that's your gift. Give that gift joyfully and freely. It's a gift that the Lord accepts. If your gift is caring for other people, if it's walking into a classroom and helping kids know about the love of Jesus, even though they've never heard about Him, let that be your gift. Paula Hamilton is just a dear soul. She's been a nurse. She was a nurse for a long time. Some nurses love to go into the ER, and it's crazy, and they're just trying to do triage. Like, let's stop the bleeding. One thing that Paula did so well is the way that she cared for elderly people. The ones that found themselves kind of pushed aside, and she would love on those people. If that is your gift, give it to the Lord and do it joyfully. God accepts and loves those gifts. Just give them from the heart. And so we're just 6 days away from Christmas, and we're going to be celebrating His gift to us. I want to encourage you to think about the ways that you can give back to the Lord cheerfully and do it honoring Him and His Son, Jesus. I just want to remind all of you that this Wednesday night we are not meeting. Guy, have we posted the podcast has been posted. It's on our Facebook page. It's on our website. I do want to let you know, if you're looking for the video version of it, we don't have one. We didn't record a video version this time. I'll give a little bit of a spoiler. We're going to be talking about speeches, or we talked about speeches in the Bible, and we started off with great speeches from movies. And if we put a video of a great speech on YouTube, it will get flagged and kicked off for copyright reasons. And so we don't want to infringe upon that or do anything illegal. And so we have only the audio portions up there, so we can keep that up there. So this Wednesday, no class, no gathering, nothing. We have the podcast. It's already up. If you're headed out of town, you can flip that on your smartphone and listen to it on the road. And the next Sunday, we are going to meet at, can anybody tell me? 10 a.m. Okay, only 10 a.m. We normally meet at 9. We're meeting at 10. We're meeting for worship, and we won't have classes after. So if you have family in town, you get an extra hour of rest and gathering things up and figuring out showering times. And then come join us at 10 a.m. for worship. And then the next Wednesday, we're going to have, the 29th, we'll have devotional and singing. And then we go back to normal. So I want to thank you all again for being here. Be safe in your travels and shine your light and find ways to glorify God this week. Let's close out in prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father God, thank you again for being such an awesome God. We just pray that as we head out of here, our worship will continue and we will find ways not only to acknowledge the gift that you've given us, but be willing to re-gift it and share it with other people. The greatest gift ever given was your Son Jesus. And so we want to celebrate it this week and every week. May we do that as we honor you. It's in your Son's name that I pray. Amen. Thank you guys for being here. We look forward to seeing you next Sunday, not Wednesday.